Thank you, everyone. As I mentioned, Dan Portillo, I'm a partner at Greylock. And if you remember nothing from my talk today, remember that you always start a presentation with a picture of a baby. And if you don't have a baby, use a puppy. It doesn't really matter. All you want to do is just like they remember something really sweet about your talk, and then that automatically makes it a little bit better. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my career and how it's evolved over time. I wasn't always a glamorous Greylock VC person. I was a recruiter working with a number of different startups, and I say that jokingly, by the way. And so I worked with a lot of startups and looking at like how my job has actually changed and how many people in the audience are recruiters where they are head of recruiting means that they're the only person recruiting at that company and learning what that actually means. And a lot of it changed when I went to Mozilla. So I worked for a guy named John Lilly, who's a partner at Greylock now. And I would have one-on-ones with him on a weekly basis. And I knew my job was fundamentally different when in my one-on-one, he brought up all the things that I said the week before. And I realized that I was now on the hook for actually doing the things that came out of my mouth, which was different than me just spouting off about different pieces in the past. And I coined a term that I lovingly call the John Lilly fire drill, which was him asking me a random question and then me having to go hunt down what the answer was. So one day I come into his office and he says to me, I believe that people quit Mozilla after we have a major release. So I had to go do the research. This is actually a dramatization. This is not what my chart actually looked like, but this is just much prettier. So I plotted time on one axis, our major releases along that axis, and then when we lost people to just prove that there was absolutely no correlation between releases and people quitting. We did find other correlations, so it was a great exercise, but it wasn't that specific correlation. And so that's how we went from event to event, thinking through like what are the set of things. He would ask me a question, I'd go hunt down what the answer was, and then over time I started thinking about what are the set of things that I should be asking or that I should be measuring. And I'm sure my team will still tell you about the months I kept hollering about time and process, where we had people, like every time we hit 2 weeks of someone being in process, like that was the red signal, and like having that conversation over and over again. And so it continued to go on this way of me thinking about what are the questions that we'd have in the organization, and then how do we solve that question, and then using data as the marker for being able to do that. So I specifically remember one night waking up at 3 in the morning, thinking about and worrying about people leaving the company. So got up, pulled out a spreadsheet, put the name of every single employee on that spreadsheet. In the first column, I wrote impact, which was what is the effect on the organization if that person were to leave? 1 is like no one would even notice. 3 was like we're completely screwed. So high scores were really bad, and low scores are bad for a different reason. So looking at this data, I sat down with John and said, all right, so if this is the case, what are the set of things that we're going to do about it? So we went on and created what we called a leveling system. We educated our managers on looking for opportunities to give people more responsibility and really helping people navigate their career. And that led to us having people at Mozilla for 5, 6, 7, 8 years when the average turnaround in most startups is like 2 or 3. So looking at what is the right question, and then what are the set of things that you do around it, and then how data manages that particular piece. So as I think about what that meant from a career perspective or my personal perspective, the first step for me was execution, where someone would say, like, here's a rec, go find this person, and we'd hire them. And then it went on to John asking me a set of questions, which were like, how do we do X? How do we do Y? And what's the supporting data around it in order to make that successful? And then moving on to what are the set of questions that I should be asking from an organizational perspective, and what's the information that I need in order to make that better? And then from there, it went on to actually just setting goals and trying to solve those problems and working with my team and the organization to make that work. And my role within the company and my expectations changed when I started to progress along that path. So my first presentation was just a bunch of math formulas, which I was going to bore you to death with them. But I wanted to get away from that and really just talk about, what are the right questions. And my call to action for the group here is to go home, get out of the regular execution that you're doing, and really think about what are the questions that are really important to what you're doing, and ask them frequently and figure out what's the set of information that you need in order to answer them and actually affect change within the organization. And so one of those different pieces, or one of the questions that you can ask is really understanding your funnel and how that works. So fundamentally, where do people come from? Where do you lose people in that process? When they say yes or when they say no, how is it how is it that you know that and are able to apply that back into what you're doing? And at looking at all those different pieces and where you can save time within that process. Understanding what it costs to actually hire, and it's not just a monetary piece, but it is what does each offer actually cost us in relation to man hours, and that is the most important conversation that you'll have with your hiring manager or your CEO, that for every person we hire, we have to actually see these many people, it's X number of interviews, it costs X amount of time, and when we lose them, like that is the amount of time, when that person says no, we invested X amount of hours in order to make that, in order to lose that hire. So from there, you look for opportunities to reduce time and to increase effectiveness. And when you frame it in time of cost, like it really changes the dynamic of the conversation with the executive team. And then the last thing from cost is really understanding your hiring velocity. Like given the size of the team and the resources you have, how many people can you reasonably hire in a certain amount of time? So if someone says, okay, we're gonna double the organization in 6 months, to be able to have an actual reasonable, a reasonable way of being able to ask or answer that question. Last recommendation is thinking about attrition, the how, the who, and the why, understanding whether your attrition is actually voluntary or involuntary, or whether it's regrettable or non-regrettable. And voluntary, regrettable attrition is really bad. So as you have a good sense of what that actually looks like, it'll be helpful to have more strategic conversations with the executive team. And so as a last recap, always have a picture of a baby in your slides, it changes everything for you, and ask lots and lots of questions. Thank you very much.